Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. I'm pleased to be joined today by, quite frankly, my biggest guest yet. It's none other than Brian Anderson of the Milwaukee Brewers and Turner Sports. He calls baseball and basketball. He's had a illustrious career so far, and he's got a lot more left to go. Brian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Man, if I'm your biggest guest, you're going to have to start dialing this thing up a little bit. Let's go. You're better than that, Billy. You're better than that.
Well, Brian, in case you guys didn't know, is a very humble guy as well, but can't thank him enough for his time today. So like I mentioned, Brian, you do so much stuff nationally. You work for the Brewers. You work with Turner Sports, calling baseball and basketball. But first, what have you been up to this offseason? I mean, I'm guessing it's a little bit different considering we're in COVID and in a pandemic, but I'm sure for you, after a tough year in terms of working, it's always nice to get some time off.
Yeah, I'm about 10 days into this off season, I guess. So it's been good. I mean, just reconnecting with my family, and my daughter is a college student. She's at Marquette University. So she's a junior at Marquette, and just been, hanging out with her and my wife and trying to reacclimate to home life as best I can. We had a pretty busy run there. I was gone for about 9 weeks, minus 3 days at home between the NBA bubble and the MLB bubble in San Diego for the American League postseason. But just been home. I have a honey-do list just like everybody, and there's a lot of little projects around the house that I like to tackle. And I got a stack of mail this high on my desk, just organizing, the stuff around the house. For example, today I am proud to announce that I've got my snow plowing service all set up for the wintertime. That was my big goal, aside from coming on with you today, Billy.
Oh, well, I'm sure, you living in Wisconsin, I mean, snow's a big part there. I do want to go back to your early days. Of course, you are from a much more warm weather climate area in Texas. How did you decide to get into sports broadcasting?
Well, I played all the sports growing up, and as I played, competed, we all have our backyard moments at the wiffle ball game where we're calling play by play, and we're imagining, bottom of the ninth in the World Series. So I did that too. But as I started to get into high school and was playing at a competitive level in high school in baseball and basketball, baseball and football, and then I played basketball and golf and tennis more as a recreational sport. I just started doing play-by-play as I was playing and as others were playing, and if I was on the bench or if I was, not at bat, not on the bases. And I don't know, I remember doing this. We had a video project, and this is 1987, so this is a while back, and I can remember like taking this big giant camcorder where you slide the VHS tape into the camcorder, and we were supposed to cut a wrestling promo. At least that's what I decided to do. It was for like a speech and communications class in high school, and so we staged this whole thing where we basically did like wrestling intros, and I created this whole scene, and I was running the camera, but I also announced it, was the wrestling announcer, and we had characters, and there was probably 5 or 6 of us involved, and there was an actual wrestling match, which was all fake, but we called it, or I called it. And for whatever reason, it's the first time I'd ever done anything like that. I wasn't even thinking about it. I was just doing the project, and I wasn't even thinking about me as a broadcaster. But when we played it back, when we edited it together in our final project, we played the wrestling show back, which was about 4 or 5 minute tape demo. People really liked it, and they said, "Man, that sounds legit. It sounds like a wrestling announcer." So I think all that influence of watching all the sports, playing the sports, and so I just kept doing that wherever I would go, and playing sports as an amateur. And then into my college days, I played college baseball as well, and then I would just call it. And believe it or not, people responded well to it. Not just my friends, but even my coaches. So they would always ask me to do it, or if we were watching a game, say we'd be sitting in the stands and we'd be watching 2 other teams play, and we were in a tournament, they would all sit by me and ask me to call the game. And so I had no thought about being a broadcaster at this point, but I would start doing it and people would get laughs out of it. And, I'd make up funny stories, and something my grandfather used to do. We'd pass somebody on the street and he'd see somebody that he didn't know, but he said, that fella right there, he owns a used car lot in Denton, Texas. And matter of fact, he came over in the war. And he would just make up these fantastic stories about people that he'd never met that weren't true, but he would just entertain us with his storytelling. And so I started doing that myself. And then my team I played for in college, we shared a minor league baseball facility with the AA Texas League team in San Antonio. So as it turns out, my head coach was saying, well, you need to get to know their radio announcer. You should actually pursue this as a potential career. And, I that was one way of telling me I wasn't good enough to play professionally. But, I started hearing that from a lot of people. So I actually, while in college, started calling games into a Radio Shack tape recorder in the stands, from the stands, and then just kind of starting the process while I was in school. So that's kind of like the arc of how I decided to make this a career.
And as they say, that's all she wrote. You talk about your time in San Antonio with the Missions, and you also worked for the San Antonio Spurs, who, of course, are a first-class organization. I mean, they've won 5 championships under Greg Popovich with Tim Duncan, David Robinson at first. Then you had Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, Kawhi Leonard in 2014. What was it like to work for an organization like the Spurs?
Well, it's a stroke of luck, honestly, because and this is how things have to happen in your life, and everybody who's got a story to tell has these moments. But I was playing college baseball in Georgetown, Texas for an NAIA school called Southwestern University. They decided that they were going to drop scholarships and go Division III. And so I would have maintained my scholarship, but I wanted to play at a higher level than Division III. So I transferred to St. Mary's University in San Antonio. They had recruited me out of high school, but they had a really talented catcher that was 2 years older than me, and I didn't want to sit the bench for 2 years. But anyway, long story short, I ended up transferring there for my sophomore year. And this became like the centerpiece of my whole career, leading to the Spurs, by the way. This is not a backward story, but at that time, we're sharing a minor league facility with a baseball team in the Texas League. The Spurs are training at our gym. So this is like the center of sports in San Antonio, professional sports anyway. And so I got to know, as I'm playing baseball, the producer of the Spurs, who's there at Spurs training camp, which we're all hanging around because we played pickup games at the gym all the time. He played in an over 30 baseball league, and he wanted like baseball lessons. He was a catcher, and so I was a catcher in college, and we struck up a friendship. And next thing you know, he hires me to become his first ever intern. He created an internship, and I was his intern. His name is Mike Kikarillo, and he became a huge mentor and close friend. He's still the director of broadcasting with the Spurs all these years later. So this is like 1991, 92. And I went to, as I'm in college playing baseball, I went and did an internship in the summertime with the San Antonio Spurs. And that really started it. And I ended up, running camera. I was a cameraman. Jerry Tarkanian was the head coach, believe it or not. He got fired. They brought in John Lucas, and then Bob Hill, and then ultimately Greg Popovich. So I saw all of this from an inside perspective as an intern, and then working as a cameraman. I had 2 jobs going there, and just kind of like had a front row seat for the development of this franchise that was, kind of middle of the pack, and had been an ABA franchise and had come into the league and never really got their respect. And then all of a sudden, all these years later, in 99, when I was just transitioning to be on the air, they win their first championship. And then, the rest is history. I ended up working for that organization for 14 years total, 8 of them on the air. And I was there for the first 4 championships. And what has been a dynasty in the NBA, and this incredible run, and just seeing this organization put together, the same kind of leadership, going through all the negative the fire pop era in the late 90s up till, like, you wouldn't even think of it at this point. So yeah, the Spurs they have a huge role in my career, my life, just being a part of something bigger than me in an intimate way with an organization that, was hard on me at times, but also took great care of me as well, and helped me turn into the broadcaster that I am.
Speaking of another organization you're affiliated with, that's with the Milwaukee Brewers. You're the television play-by-play man. What is it like to call games for them on a daily basis? And also, how do you go about your prep work? I mean, you've got to find stories every day over the course of a 162-game season, at least in normal times. I mean, how do you go about finding stories and being able to put forth an interesting broadcast every night?
Well, it starts by being inquisitive and just being interested. I always tell young broadcasters, and I'm sure I've told you this too, that it's more important to be interested than it is interesting. And too many are trying to be interesting, and they're not. If you're interested, then you're going to dig down all these rabbit holes, because what I love about the business is not my voice on all these big moments or these games. I mean, that's great, and that's what I'm paid to do. But what I really love about the business is digging up these stories and being able to find a path, why a guy gets to a certain level, why an athlete has arrived here. And everybody's got a story. And if you've arrived at the major league level or the NBA or any kind of professional sports level as an athlete, you've really got a story. I mean, you're a hero in your hometown, no matter if you're the last player on the roster. So for me, that's the fascinating part. So to say, well, how do you prep? How do you get through a 3.5, 4 hour broadcast? Baseball's so long, or the NBA so fast. I mean, to me, that's what's really fun about, you know, about the craft, is not just calling the plays, but that secondary piece that goes with it, that is between the plays, the storytelling, the stats that may validate certain stories, the silence that goes in between those pieces as well. So that's kind of what entertains me, and I just try to be entertained. And if I'm interested and entertained by what I'm learning about and I can disseminate, then I hope the audience would feel the same. That's my goal anyway.
Nationally, you've called games on TBS for the MLB playoffs for the last handful of years. I've always wondered, because you've also called Brewer games on national TV as well, is it ever hard for you to make that adjustment? Instead of when you're with the Brewers, you're partial to them, but when you're a national broadcaster, you've got to be impartial to the two teams playing. Is that ever confusing for you or hard to navigate when you're calling the Brewers on a national broadcast, or is that something that you've gotten used to by this point?
Well, I mean, I've gotten used to it for sure. It was difficult in the beginning, and I talked to guys like Tom Brenneman and Joe Buck and Vin Scully, who all called the teams they worked for in the postseason in baseball. Mike Breen with the New York Knicks doing a national broadcast. I think in the beginning, the hard part is there's almost too much familiarity. And I can remember the first time I ever called the Brewers in a national setting. I was using phrases like, instead of Prince Fielder, I was calling him Prince. Well, Prince is, he's down 0-2. Prince is down 0-2. JJ's next up, JJ Hardy. So kind of getting away from the nicknames, excuse me. And I think I learned pretty quickly that, I never called JJ Hardy on a Brewers broadcast. I didn't call him Fielder. I didn't call him Hardy or Hart for Corey Hart. I kind of called them by their first names. And I don't really do that anymore, even on a local broadcast, because I realized that was a little too informal for me. And talking to guys like Vin Scully and Tom Brenneman and those who had done national games, Joe Buck, they didn't really do that with their local team. So that was the biggest change, but it was an easy change to make. And then once the game started, you're so in tune with what you're doing. The only difference is on a Brewers local broadcast, everything is from the Brewers perspective. So you're going to be fair, I am anyway, but you're going to present it from the Brewers perspective. If a call doesn't go the Brewers way, it's Craig Counsell's not happy about that, as opposed to, well, maybe Mike Schilt, he appreciates that call. On a national broadcast, you're only celebrating success. So if Albert Pujols hits a home run in Game 6 of the NLCS off Zach Greinke, I have to get to that level that a Cardinal fan would be for an Albert Pujols home run. So that's the only difference. And once you get into the game, you kind of forget all that. The hard part comes after the game when all the Brewers fans are mad at you and all the Cardinals fans think you're a homer. And so, but that's just kind of part of what we signed up for. And you're going to get that no matter what. So that's really the only challenge of it.
You called a handful of memorable moments with TBS in the MLB playoffs. My favorite moment, I don't know if you knew this, Brian, if we had chatted about it before, but I'm a big Nationals fan, so you will always be on the call when they clinched the berth to the World Series
Yeah.
against the Cardinals last year. In fact, I'm wearing a Nationals postseason shirt. But I have to ask you, what do you remember about that series? I mean, I think about those two games in St. Louis when Max Scherzer and Anibal Sanchez were just on fire. I mean, Sanchez almost had a no-hitter. I think he took a no-hitter into the 8th inning.
Yeah.
And the Nats end up, destroying the Cardinals at home, finished off that series in a sweep. What do you remember particularly about that series?
Well, I just, I remember how dominant the Nationals looked, and I was really happy for Howie Kendrick, and, a guy kind of been through a little bit of the ringer, backside of his career, maybe was just a role player, but then, everybody got a chance to realize what a great player he was, especially in the postseason when it does get intense. I really enjoyed being around those guys. I felt like the Washington Nationals that particular year in 2019 was a team that was comfortable with analytics, but also extremely connected to their scouts and the people who were doing their advance and were constantly um, giving praise to individuals, not just the formula, the process, the system. My older brother is a baseball scout, so I feel, somewhat connected to that side of the world and the human touch and the things you can see. And, that's what I remember about that. I remember having conversations with Davey Martinez and, you ask him about a certain matchup and he would reference individual names that, hey, this guy brought this to us and we think we can exploit this matchup. And it wasn't just, well, the formula says, or not that they don't use that, they do. But I just like that. I like the vibe of their clubhouse. I thought their team kind of moved well from one step in the lineup to the other. It definitely had this handoff kind of feel for it. The story of Zimmerman, who had been there, one of the faces of the franchise, and there was a ton of narratives. Their great pitching, Max Scherzer being this ace horse, and then Anibal Sanchez coming out of nowhere and just being this incredible postseason performer. I mean, I love that team. I love following that team. I remember maybe more than anything, most vividly, being on the field in front of 40,000 plus, giving the National League trophy to the Nationals and then the NL MVP award for the AL or the NLCS to Howie Kendrick, and just like that ricochet of crowd coming back at you was quite the rush. And I don't think anybody left. I mean, it felt like there wasn't an empty seat in the place. I mean, for an award ceremony that came 20 minutes after the final out, it was really cool. I have one of those pictures in my office still. Is something I'll never forget.
I also have to ask you about a moment which you're probably more well known for, and that is the late great Roy Halladay's no-hitter in the postseason back in 2010. I think it was the second postseason no-hitter in MLB history. What do you remember about that game? And obviously, I'm sure for you, it's got to take even more of a meaning now with the passing, unfortunately, of Halladay.
Yeah, it definitely does. And that game was, that was an exercise in all those games I had done in the minor leagues. I had done at that point probably 2,000 baseball games as a professional announcer. And I can remember and I'd done no hitters, but on this particular stage with this massive audience, with this, only Don Larson's perfect game was the only other no hitter that had ever been thrown in the playoffs. So not only was this going to be potentially the second no hitter, but it was going to be the first televised no hitter, because in '56 they only had highlights and it was broadcast on the radio, but they were just newsreel highlights of the game. It wasn't on live television. So that all came into play. And I can just remember, telling myself constantly in the middle of that, because he was dominant. I remember saying in the fifth inning on the air that, he's got a no-hitter, like he could do this, because he looked that good. And I can remember saying each inning, each half inning, like, you've done this 1,000 times. Just call what you see, and not try to get too blown away by the moment. And that really helped me. I think I worry about broadcasters who maybe come from the sports anchor world into play-by-play, or maybe don't have the reps and they're pushed into a situation. I had all those games and all those reps, and it really became no different. Matter of fact, on some levels, it became easier, because the crowd, the noises, the sounds, the way it's all unfolding, it didn't require me to do a whole lot. It was much harder to do a Tuesday night Texas League game between San Antonio and Tulsa in front of 500 fans than it was to do a no-hitter. There's more pressure, and you certainly don't want to get it wrong, but the actual mechanics of calling plays was pretty simple, because every out mattered, every pitch mattered. You didn't have to do this whole dance of trying to entertain between, because that you didn't need to. It all had it right there in front of you. So it's one of my great memories. It helped me, arrive to a different level in my career. Golfers talk about this a lot, where, you have to feel what you feel and go through, competing in a major to understand how your body's going to react, your mind, how your mouth, your words, your ad lib. And I needed that. I kind of had those steps, but man, that was like the first real intense, huge audience moment, legendary moment that I was ever really a part of. I had done a few things prior to that, but not like that. And so once I did that, it gave me great confidence that, I could trust my ability and my experience and call the game properly.
A moment I'm sure you'll never forget. Another experience that you've gotten to call is March Madness. Unfortunately, it didn't happen this year, but I know for college students like myself and around the country, we love March Madness. I mean, anytime you get to see your school play in that tournament, it's got to be an amazing feeling. You have a chance to call it, and we all know those first 4 days in particular are definitely a madness, no pun intended. What is it like for you to get to call those games? And of course, we hope back in 2021 when it returns that we'll get to see it again.
Yeah, me too. That was a huge disappointment that the NCAA tournament didn't happen this year, and for all those reasons. And to call those events, it's one of my favorite things to do. It's the hardest thing I do every year. From a broadcaster perspective, it's really challenging to do that many games, to absorb and do your homework for 8 teams the first day. 4 games, 8 teams, 4 games in a row. At the same time, it's the most rewarding as well, because the games mean so much to these kids, these programs, these communities, and it's a one and done. It's a win or go home scenario. So as much as we love Game Sevens in our sports that we cover, these are Game Sevens every day, and we get that for 3 weeks. And so the win or go home mentality, and it's special. It's special to be a part of. You're a part of something that's going to be historic in nature, and even if it's not on from a national perspective a historic game, it's always going to be for the participants in those games. They're always going to remember playing in those games. There's going to be families watching the recording of these games. Even if it was an insignificant 20-point blowout, it's still going to mean something to somebody on some level forever, as long as they're alive. So you understand all that going in. There's a lot of work that goes into it. And then it gets back to every possession, every play. There is time to fill in some of the gaps and tell some stories about the players and how they've gotten there. But really, every possession matters. And the importance of each play and each sequence means so much that it becomes easier for a broadcaster, because there's not this ancillary line of information that you need to use to entertain fans. It just every play matters in the NCAA tournament, and that's awesome. That's what I love about it. I love being able to react off body language and to see it in their eyes, or a reaction from a coach or an assistant coach, or players communicating with themselves. Like I'm always looking for that anyway. If it's a bad game and it's a regular season game and it really doesn't have that kind of importance, you're halfway paying attention to that, halfway trying to deliver extra information that may make it more entertaining. But you don't have to worry about that in the NCAA tournament.
So you have already had a pretty memorable career, but I'm sure you never expected to be doing this job in the middle of a worldwide pandemic. We didn't have sports for months. We didn't know if they would return, but you recently had a chance to call games in both the MLB and the NBA bubble. I mean, especially from an NBA perspective, we didn't know back in March if we would be able to even resume the season. Instead, you go to this bubble, which a lot of people determined was one of the best, safest places in the world. I mean, with the amount of negative COVID tests. I'm not even sure they had a positive COVID test after a couple months in the bubble. But
Mm-mm.
what was it like to call games in Orlando? Like you mentioned early on, you were away from your family for a long time, had to really stay in that bubble. I mean, what do you remember about that experience?
Well, it was a great experience, and I'm glad I was a part of it. It helped me learn a lot about, how we can look after each other. I think wearing a mask is important, and I thought it was important before I left. And then when you realize we were there 6 weeks, many were there for 9 weeks. I was there 6 weeks. We didn't have one positive test. We made a pact with each other, our broadcasting crew, the players, the coaches, that we would look after each other and we wouldn't put ourselves in harm's way, and we wouldn't go out and we wouldn't get into the public, and we would wear masks and we would wash our hands. And I think, it's a testament to an incredible social experiment that you can perform um, in your job and still keep yourself safe and still maintain some level of safety protocol there to be able to in our case provide television entertainment. So it was a great experience. I hope I never have to do it again. Calling the games mechanically was a little odd. It wasn't hard. It was just different. To call games of that magnitude with that big of an audience, with no fans, was weird. The TV experience that you got as a viewer was completely different than what it was when you were actually there. Behind those screens, behind those curtains, are just empty spaces, and there's no noise other than the DJ and whatever fake crowd noise they piped in from NBA 2K. So that it was just a surreal experience. It took me about the first half of the first game I did. We were also positioned a little higher. We weren't sitting on the floor. We were up, about 50 feet and, back toward the mezzanine level. So it took me about a half to get my bearings. We're also sitting in a plexiglass box, basically like a Pope mobile. So each of us has our own plexiglass, so that communication between your partner, between your stats guy, that it was different. We couldn't tap each other on the arm or the shoulder or pass a note. It was just, we were surrounded by plexiglass. So once we got over all the awkwardness of it all and retraining your brain, then it just became the game again. And they competed like crazy, both baseball and basketball, and that was really fun to watch, because then you can get lost in the competition as a broadcaster. And I give them a lot of credit. And, that was the highlight of their day, because they're basically isolated just like we are. So that was the highlight of our day, was to go actually work a game. And then all the other 20 hours of the day, we really didn't do anything. We sat in our rooms and, maybe had a meal by the pool or whatever it was. But it was, yeah, I mean, it's pretty much like prep and do the game and rinse and repeat. It's like Groundhog Day over and over again.
This is more of a baseball question, but when you travel on the road, is there a favorite city you like to go to, whether it's to call the game at the ballpark or to go out and see the city? I mean, do you have one in particular you like to visit every year, or is there a few here and there that you're like, man, these are some great ballparks and cities to visit?
I feel that way about all the cities. Again, I spent 9 years in the minor leagues. So even in those cities, I enjoyed going to new cities and just different cultures and climates and whatever. But, once I got to the major league cities were awesome, always. And they still are. So, in my in my years with the Brewers, going to Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, St. Louis, Chicago, that gets old because we do it all the time. They're in our division. So probably, when we get a chance to go to San Diego or San Francisco or New York, it's always fun and great. And I always like the cities where we can play golf and there's a good golf set up there because I love to play and helps make the road trips go by faster. So yeah, I mean, I think every city has something great to offer, especially big league cities. I think San Francisco is probably one of my favorites. There's great golf there. The ballpark's beautiful. Just being out on the West Coast, usually in the summer, it's really cool there in the summer, the temperature. So yeah, I mean, San Francisco's up there. I love going to LA and San Diego. I kind of trend toward the West Coast cities a little bit more than the East Coast cities, I think. But I love going to Miami. Great golf, hotel right on the beach, easy in and out of the ballpark, even though there's no fans there, even when we're in a situation with fans. And the food, man, like I love going to Miami. So those are probably on my list.
What's your advice, Brian, to sportscasters, young sportscasters in college and high school trying to make a living in this profession? As you know, this pandemic has upset so many things about not just sports, but everyday life. What's your advice to guys like me who want to get into this business, but of course, with our current situation, it's not as easy as it used to be, and even then, it's a pretty hard profession to break into.
It is, and a lot of people get frustrated by that and, end up quitting because it is hard and there are a lot of challenges. So I think generally what I would say is, number one, this has nothing to do with broadcasting, but find a second means of income. That's really important. Whether you wait tables or bartend or, try to work in a job that's flexible and that you can work anywhere. If you need to move around, move cities, that you can pick up and do that job. There are a number of jobs that are like that. For me, I was a handheld cameraman. I did a lot of tech jobs in television production, graphics, audio. I felt like I could go get a job anywhere because of my experience doing that. And I did. I never had to leave. I was lucky because I did minor league baseball forever, 9 years, but it was in the same city. So without that second means of income, I wouldn't have been able to keep going because you're going to have to do a lot of stuff for free. You're going to have to, you're going to have to do games and call games when you're not being paid. And if you are being paid, it's very minimal. I did high school football and minor league baseball on the radio when I first started. I think I made $25 a game when I first started out. So obviously it's not something you're going to get rich doing in the beginning. So that second means of income is really important. The next thing on more of mechanical, technical side of things is to really bear down and listen and watch yourself as much as you can. Your generation is more used to being on camera and recorded than mine was because of the iPhone, and you're used to seeing and hearing yourself. We didn't really get that much. My generation, like you hardly, even photographs were minimal. They were box cameras or whatever. It'd take a long time to develop. You hardly saw yourself. You certainly never saw yourself instantaneously. So my advice is to take that iPhone or whatever your smartphone is and prop it up and do a Zoom thing like we're doing here and create content and watch yourself, how you're expressing yourself, how you speak. And don't look at it as a personality trait. Look at it as if it were a golf swing and you're going to fix your golf swing. So you take the whole character assassination part of it out of it, because it's hard to watch yourself and see yourself. And I come across so many kids, and I was the same way, that they get so depressed when they listen to themselves for the first time or they see themselves and they go, I can never achieve any kind of status. But believe me, I sounded brutal when I first started. Had a real Texas drawl and I talked up here like that in the register. And, I had to like change how I would breathe and how I would speak and finish sentences and all of that. And I was very practical about improvement. Do it, watch it, listen to it, make an adjustment, and rinse and repeat, and rinse and repeat. That's probably the best advice I can give. And do things like what you're doing, create content however you can. There's plenty of ways to do that, whether it's Zoom, releasing that on YouTube, releasing that on IG Live or Twitter Live. Force yourself into a position where you've got to speak on air live. Like you've got to deliver it. And even if nobody's going to be watching, that's not the point. It exists in clippable files, and put it on your Twitter page. And today I had a chance to call play-by-play of, two dogs wrestling in the yard. I mean, that's kind of funny right now. Like, do whatever you can, but hold yourself accountable to do it well. And the way you hold yourself accountable is to know that it's going to be released into the public on some level. And so you may hate it. And I hated it when I was a minor league broadcaster, and I would listen to the tapes and think, oh, I can't believe I sound this bad or wasn't on time here. And that was actually went on the radio. But I'm going to try to be better tomorrow. And so that's the idea. Just try to keep sharpening the axe and be better tomorrow.
Brian, my final question for you is that you've had a memorable career already. I mean, I mentioned it. You've called March Madness, NBA playoffs, MLB playoffs. You're the TV play-by-play voice of the Brewers. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? I mean, are you content with where you're at right now? Is there an event you haven't called, like the NBA Finals or even the World Cup that you want to call? I mean, where do you see yourself in 10 years? Are you content with where you're at currently?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying this to be cliche, but I don't even look that far ahead. I used to. When I was younger, I had goals, and I want to get to this level by a certain age, and that was probably important at that time. That also created a lot of negativity and a little bit of depression, because that comparative thinking is destructive. I think 20 years ago, I made a decision to just try to dominate my space. And I don't mean that to say I'm the best broadcaster in my space. I mean, dominate my space in that I'm going to get comfortable with my prep, who I am, what I'm saying, my ad lib ability, my ability to call a game, and my ability to be a good teammate and be a better person with all the people that are involved. And when I started doing that and just like being in the now, I didn't know where it was all going to end up. My goal was to just be on the radio with a Major League Baseball team. That's all I ever wanted out of life. And I would have just been totally content to do that. But I've done so much more than that. I have done radio, but I've done television, and I've done national television, and I've done different sports. So I think it's just really important not to try to look too far in advance, but dominate your space. Be the best you can be. Again, sounds like a cliche from an old guy, but until you've owned that space you're in right now, you and me in this interview, this is our space right now. Until you own that and can be great at that, then you can't say I deserve to be here or feel like you should be at a different level. You've got to just constantly be great in the space you are. And that's not just about calling all the plays right. That's also being a good citizen, being a person to those you're working with. And so I really think that's important. Even if some people may get a leg up on you, or if you can help somebody and offer some advice and then they end up getting a job that you wanted. That happened to me a number of times in my career. And I always say, why am I helping this person? They just took a job that I really wanted. But I think it all kind of works out where if you're doing this every day as a habit and you're serving others every day and you're making sure you're doing your best to prepare and deliver on the air, then who knows where it's going to go. That's a big philosophical answer to your question, where I want to be in 10 years, but I have no idea where 10 years, I may be back calling minor league baseball in 10 years. I have no idea. I hope not, even though I loved it there, but you just don't know. Just let's be in the now.
Brian, I want to thank you so much for your time. And for the audience members who don't know, first time I ever reached out to Brian kind of on a blind contact, a cold email. And he, I sent him some of my tapes and he gave me, so much feedback. It was about as detailed of an email as you can be. And Brian, I've followed your career from really to start the last couple of years now, especially. I love seeing all of your success. It could not happen to a better person. Like I said, you're a great broadcaster, but more importantly, even better person. And can't thank you enough for your time today and chatting with me.
My pleasure, man. It's great to watch you grow and advance in your career too. Best of luck to you, Billy.
That's Brian Anderson, Milwaukee Brewers, Turner Sports, baseball, and basketball. We want to thank him so much for joining us today. On behalf of Brian Anderson, I'm Billy Parvatam. This has been the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. We'll see you next time. Thanks again, folks.